I was holding a dish towel when I heard my father give away my condo. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and roast turkey. In the dining room, my father raised his voice loud enough for the whole family to hear him. He announced the condo would be a Christmas gift for my sister's family. A real home for her kids, settled right after New Year's. My parents never asked me. I owned that place. I paid for every dollar of it. And I stood there, towel in hand, and I clapped, smiled. And then I did the one thing none of them saw coming. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. I'm Reagan, 34. And this is the story of the night my own family handed away the home I built with my bare hands, and what it cost them to try. If you've ever been treated like your life belongs to everyone but you, stay with me till the end, because the final twist is the reason this story went viral in the first place. Every Christmas Eve, I drove to my parents' house in Ohio with a pie in the passenger seat and a check in my coat pocket. The pie was for the table. The check was for my father's medical bills, the ones he never fully paid off and never fully mentioned. I'd been writing those checks for years. Somewhere along the way, being generous stopped being a gift and became a job description. I was the fixer, the accountant, the daughter who solved things. Water heater dies. Call Reagan. Taxes get scary. Call Reagan. My sister overdraws her account in March. Somehow, still my problem. I never said no. That was the whole issue, I just didn't have a name for it yet. My parents lived in the same house I grew up in, on a quiet cul-de-sac where everyone knew everyone. That Christmas Eve, the driveway was packed. My sister Dana's minivan, my aunt's sedan, and a rental truck parked across the street I almost missed. A big white moving truck. The kind you rent by the day. But I thought nobody moves in December. I told myself I was overthinking it. I climbed the porch steps where my grandfather once taught me to tie my shoes, with no idea that by the end of the night, that house would feel like something I had to defend myself inside of. My mother opened the door, kissed my cheek and said, "Your father has news." She was glowing. I should have asked what kind of news right then. That's the first attention anchor of this story, because by the time you find out what that news actually was, you'll understand exactly why I should have run. Dinner started loud in the good way. 11 of us crammed around a table built for 8, elbows bumping, gravy passed twice. My father sat at the head with the look he got when he was holding a card he couldn't wait to play. Halfway through the meal, he tapped his glass and said he had an announcement, but it would wait until dessert. My sister's husband, Cole, grinned into his plate. The kids kept guessing it was a puppy. In my head I guessed a new baby. Maybe a new job for Cole, whose contracting business had folded that fall. I wanted it to be good news. I always wanted good news for them. Then Cole leaned over and asked something that sat wrong in my stomach immediately. Could my condo ever be sublet, hypothetically, if someone wanted to? I told him I owned it outright so I could do whatever I wanted with it, and changed the subject fast. He nodded like I'd just confirmed something. My sister smiled at her plate. My mother got up to start the coffee with a spring in her step I hadn't seen from her in years. I told myself families ask nosy questions. I told myself the truck across the street belonged to a neighbor. Then I carried a stack of dishes into the kitchen, and that's when the whole night cracked in half, because the kitchen shares a thin wall with the dining room, and my mother's voice carries. Before I tell you what I heard, you need to understand what that condo actually meant to me. I bought it at 28. It took me 10 years to get there. 2 jobs through college, running payroll for a logistics company by day, waiting tables on weekends, eating instant noodles, driving a car with a window that wouldn't roll down. My grandfather, Earl, co-signed my very first apartment lease when no landlord would look twice at a broke 22-year-old with zero credit. He sat across from me at a diner the day I signed it, stirred his coffee, and gave me the only piece of financial advice he ever gave. Own something in your own name. Something nobody can vote you out of. I held on to that like scripture. Every raise went into savings. Every bonus went untouched into one account. When I finally had the down payment, I bought a 2-bedroom condo with morning light and a tiny balcony, and I signed the closing papers completely alone. No husband, no co-signer. Just my name. Painted every wall myself. I learned to fix the garbage disposal from a YouTube video. That place wasn't square footage, it was proof. Proof that the quiet girl who managed everyone else's money could stand on her own 2 feet. My family came to the housewarming, admired everything, ate my food, and somewhere in that visit, quietly filed the condo away as a family asset. A spare room that happened to have my name on the lease. I didn't know they thought that. Not until the kitchen. Not until my mother's voice slid through that thin wall, warm and certain, deciding my entire future for me. I stood frozen at the sink with a stack of dirty plates. My mother was telling my sister the kids could each have their own room. Cole could set up a workshop in the second bathroom. They'd move in after New Year's so the kids could start fresh at the better school district. For a few seconds my brain refused to assemble the words. They were talking about my condo, my morning light, my balcony, my grandfather's scripture made of brick and drywall. Then my mother said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life, in that gentle, reasonable voice she used when something was already decided. She doesn't need all that space. It's just her. Like my whole home was a rounding error. Like I'd been accidentally handed too much pie. And the polite thing to do was scrape some onto my sister's plate. I set the dishes down carefully so they wouldn't clatter. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I'd expected rage. Instead I felt a cold, clean quiet, the kind of stillness that settles right before a storm. This wasn't a plan they were going to run past me. It was a plan they'd already finished. The asking had been skipped on purpose, because deep down they were certain I'd say yes. I always said yes. I dried my hands and walked back into the dining room just as my father rose to his feet, tapping his glass until the whole table went silent. He looked happier than I'd seen him in years. He said the family had been through a hard stretch. Cole's work had dried up, the kids needed stability, a yard, a real home. Then he said, like a king granting land, that he and my mother had decided to give my sister's family the condo. Every head turned to me, because of course the condo was mine, and for one suspended half-second the whole table held its breath to see what I would do. My sister was already crying happy tears. The kids were cheering. Cole had his arm around her and his eyes locked on mine, and there was something in that look that wasn't gratitude. It was a dare. My father raised his glass toward me and delivered the second knife of the night. It's settled. Just like that. As if my signature was a formality. As if my ownership was sentiment. And here's the part one still think about. I smiled. I raised my own glass. I clapped soft and even, right along with everyone else. I said, "What a Christmas." My mother beamed. My father sat back down, satisfied he'd read me correctly one more time. My sister mouthed "thank you" across the table. Let her. Because in that exact moment, I understood something with total clarity. If I argued right there, I'd become the villain. The selfish aunt who valued square footage over her own nieces and nephews. They'd built the trap so perfectly that any honest reaction would prove their story true. So I didn't react. I clapped, and quietly, calmly I started doing the math. This is your second attention anchor, because the math I started that night is exactly what ends this story on New Year's Eve. I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind somewhere far ahead of the road. What surprised me most was how little I felt like crying. Kept waiting for it. Never came. What came instead was a ledger, because I'm an accountant, and when the world stops making sense, I build a spreadsheet in my head. On one side, every check I'd written, every water heater I'd fixed, every bailout I'd covered. On the other side, what they'd just done in return. They stood in a warm room and gave away the one thing I'd built without $1 of their help. And they hadn't asked, because asking would have meant admitting it was mine. They genuinely believed that Condo belonged to the family as a fact, not a metaphor. In their world I was a holding account, and the money flowed automatically to whoever cried the loudest. The worst part, the part that kept my hands cold and steady, was realizing I had trained them to think that way. Every quiet rescue. I hadn't drawn a single line, so they'd genuinely forgotten one could exist. I wasn't going to argue at a dinner table. That was their game and they'd stacked the deck. But I had my own game, the one with contracts, deadlines, and clean, undeniable math. By the time I pulled into my own parking spot, under my own balcony, I'd already remembered an email I hadn't thought about in months. I woke up the morning after Christmas to a text from my sister and a photo that turned my coffee to acid in my mouth. "Thank you, sis. You have no idea what this means." The photo showed my niece and nephew standing on the sidewalk outside my building, pointing up at my windows, grinning. Cole had driven them over on Christmas morning to let them pick their bedrooms, inside a home I had never agreed to give up. A second text followed. Could I have the place empty by the 15th? The kids' new semester started the 20th. She used the word empty, like I was a storage unit they'd already leased. I set the phone down, screen up, and made coffee. I drank it slowly while it cooled because I wasn't frozen. I was deciding. Part of me wanted to call and scream that she was picking out curtains for a house she didn't own. But I'd learned something at that table. The second I got loud, I lost. They'd circle the wagons around the crying sister, the unemployed brother-in-law, the kids who'd already picked their rooms, and I'd become the cruel aunt stealing bedrooms from children. So I texted back 2 words. Talk soon. Then I opened my laptop and searched my inbox for a name I hadn't thought about in 8 months. Marcus Webb. But before I did anything drastic, I gave them one chance. I owed myself that much, even if I owed them nothing. On the 27th, I drove back to my parents' kitchen table, the same table where the announcement had been made, and told them plainly. The condo was mine, my name was the only one on the deed, I'd paid off every dollar myself, and no one had asked whether I wanted to give it away. My father's face went tight. He said I was making this about money when it should be about family. My mother reached across the table, patted my hand, and told me not to be selfish, that my sister needed it more, that the kids needed it, that I was young and single and could always buy another one someday. She said it so kindly. That kindness was the thing that finally undid the last knot in me, because she genuinely couldn't see why a home with my name on it wasn't simply available to whoever in the family was struggling hardest. In her mind, my boundary was the selfish act, not their theft. I understood then that this door was never going to open. They hadn't made a mistake I could correct with facts. They had an entire worldview, and in it, I existed to quietly absorb the family's problems. Cole showed up at my condo that same evening without calling, standing in the doorway in his work coat with a tape measure, the same white rental truck idling at the curb. He asked if he could measure the second bedroom for bunk beds, like the place was already his. I didn't let him in. He told me, friendly at first, that my father had promised everything was arranged, that I shouldn't make this harder than it needed to be. When I told him the condo wasn't his to measure, the friendliness peeled off like wet paint. He told me his business had collapsed, that creditors called his cell during dinner, that this was the only thing standing between his kids and a worse apartment. I felt for him, genuinely, and it made everything harder. But then he said the family had decided, that I was outvoted, that I needed to fall in line. Outvoted on my own home. I came close to telling him exactly what I'd spent the afternoon arranging. The words were right there in my mouth. But a loud win is a small win, and I wanted the kind that lasts. I told him to take his tape measure home and closed the door. Through it, I heard him say I would regret this. I almost laughed at how wrong he had it. The only thing I regretted was waiting this long. That night, sitting on my living room floor, I found Marcus Webb's email thread. He was a local investor who'd knocked on doors in my building 8 months earlier, offering cash for units to rent out. Most of us had ignored him. He'd sent me a polite, specific offer. Cash, no contingencies. And I'd written back a polite no thank you because I loved my home and had no reason to sell. His offer was still sitting there in black and white, only slightly under open market value, with a note at the bottom. Offer stands if you ever change your mind. I sat with that for a long time. Selling would hurt. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. This was the place I painted with my own hands. The place that proved I could stand alone. But I now knew exactly what my family thought my home was for. A thing they could give away whenever it suited them. As long as I held on to it, they'd keep treating it like the family pantry. Something to be raided whenever someone got hungry. There was only one way to make it truly, permanently mine in the only sense that mattered. I had to make it gone. You can't give away what no longer exists. The next morning I called a real estate attorney named Renee, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who owed me a favor and billed me for it anyway. I asked one question. If my name is the only name on the deed and the unit is paid off, can anyone stop me from selling it? She actually laughed. Reagan, it's your property. You could sell it to a stranger on the street if you wanted. Nobody else gets a vote. I asked how fast a cash sale could close with clean title and no mortgage. She said under a week with a motivated buyer. Maybe by the 30th if everyone moved fast. I thanked her and sat very still, because the second piece had just fallen into place. A piece I'd been quietly carrying for 2 weeks and hadn't told a single soul about. My firm had offered me a transfer. A senior position in our Atlanta office. More money. A fresh start in a city where nobody had ever decided what I did or didn't need. I'd been on the fence about it because of my family, because of the checks and the rescues and the feeling that I alone was holding everyone together. Sitting on that floor with Renee's words in my ears and my sister's text still glowing on my phone, the fence disappeared. There was nothing left to hold together that was holding me back. Sell the condo. Take the job. Move faster than my own family. Here's your third attention anchor. Because what happens next is the part where a single legal document does more damage than any argument ever could. I want to be honest. I almost didn't go through with it. That night I sat on my bedroom floor with a cardboard box I'd moved 4 times and never unpacked. Inside were the bones of my 20s. A graduation tassel, a photo of Grandpa Earl squinting in the sun, a broken watch, the lease he'd co-signed, soft at the folds. I doubted myself because this was still my family. My mother had braided my hair. My father had taught me to drive in an empty parking lot. My sister and I had shared a bunk bed and whispered after lights out. I asked myself if I was overreacting, punishing children for their parents' sins, if a better daughter would just give a little and keep the peace. Then I dug deeper into that box under the lease to the bottom, where I kept a folder I hadn't opened since the day I closed on the condo. My grandfather had handed it to me the week I bought the place. Deed copy already inside, and I'd been too overwhelmed that day to actually read what he'd written on the cover. I opened it under the lamp. There was the original deed. Grantor. Grantee. Legal description. And on the line that mattered, one name. Reagan M. Carter, sole owner. Not my parents. Not the family. Not my sister. Just me in black ink, that nobody at that table had ever bothered to read. I ran my finger under it like a kid learning to read again. 6 years I'd owned this, and my family had convinced themselves my name was a technicality. It was never a technicality. It was recorded at the county. Stamp. Filed. Real. Then I turned the folder over and read what my grandfather had written on the cover the week he watched me become a homeowner. Just 3 words. Yours always. He'd known, somehow, the man who'd lost his own father's house to other people's decisions, that one day someone would try to convince me my home wasn't really mine. And he'd left me a note for that exact night, even though he'd died 3 years before it came. I cried the quiet way, the way you cry when something finally makes sense, because his note settled the argument my parents thought they'd already won. The condo was mine to keep, mine to sell, mine to burn down if I wanted. It had never been on the family ballot. Picked up the phone. It was time to call Marcus Webb. He picked up on the second ring, even on the 27th, when most people are still deep in holiday fog. I told him who I was, the unit number, and that if his offer still stood, I was ready. There was a pause, and then I heard him smile through the phone. The offer stood. If anything, the market had nudged it up, so he could actually do a little better than his original number. He asked what changed my mind. I told him the truth, more or less. My circumstances had shifted, and I needed to move fast and clean. He liked the word clean. Investors always do. If the title was clear and I was firm. He said his title company could open escrow the next day and close by the 30th, cash. No financing to wait on. I said the 30th worked like I was confirming a dentist appointment. And inside my chest, something both broke and steadied at exactly the same time. If this is landing for you, Hold that feeling for one more minute, because what happens on New Year's Eve is the entire reason I'm telling you this story. Marcus texted me his attorney's info before we even hung up. I forwarded it to Renee within the hour and told her I wanted every signature, every disclosure, every stamp airtight. I didn't want a single crack anyone could argue through later. And just like that, the machine started moving. Quietly, legally. 3 days out from a New Year's Eve dinner where my father planned to hand my sister a key to a home that would no longer exist for them to take. The next 2 days were the strangest of my life because on the outside nothing happened, and underneath everything did. I went to work. Answered emails. I let my phone fill up with messages from my family. And I didn't pour gasoline on a single one of them. Escrow opened. Title search confirmed exactly what I already knew. Clean title, no liens, no co-owners, one name. I signed the disclosures. I read every page twice because I'm the kind of person who reads every page twice. And that habit was about to save me. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork. It was the silence. My family assumed I was sulking but coming around. My sister texted asking about a moving date. My mother left a voicemail saying she knew I'd do the right thing, that I'd always been the sensible one. Every message assumed my surrender was just a matter of time, and I let them assume it. I didn't lie. I just stopped explaining myself to people who had never once asked me a real question. There's a kind of power in that silence I'd never let myself use before. All my life I'd over-explained, over-functioned, over-apologized. Now I just went still. A thumbs up here, a short line there, and I let the machine run. If you're the person in your family who always smooths things over, you know exactly how unnatural it feels to stop. Felt like holding your breath underwater. But I was almost to the surface. The pressure got worse as the 30th closed in, the way it always does right before people lose. My sister called 4 times on the 29th. When I finally answered, her voice was sweet and tight at the same time. When could she get a key? The kids were so excited. Did I want to break their hearts? There it was, the children, propped up like sandbags in front of her. I told her we'd talk after the new year and kept my voice as flat and warm as a closed door. My mother texted a photo of curtains she'd already bought for the kids' new rooms. Money she didn't have, spent on windows she didn't own. I looked at that photo for a long time. Not with anger anymore. With grief. These were people I loved. And they'd walked so far out onto a branch that I could no longer warn them without becoming the villain for sawing it off. They'd built this themselves. All I was about to do was stop holding the ladder. My father never called. Never texted. He was so certain it was settled that he saw no reason to check. That, more than anything, told me I was doing the right thing. A man who genuinely believed my home was mine would have at least asked if I was okay. He never wondered. He'd already moved on to planning his toast. And I already knew exactly how I was going to answer it. The one call I actually wanted came the night of the 29th, from my Aunt Carol. My mother's younger sister. The one who says the quiet part out loud at every funeral. She asked straight away if I was okay. And the question caught me so off guard I almost couldn't answer. She was the first person in my family in days to ask how I felt instead of what I was going to give. She told me my father had been calling everyone, cousins, neighbors, the whole church crowd, bragging about the generous gift, the proud grandfather making things right, practically selling tickets to New Year's Eve so people could watch him hand over the key. Something about it didn't sit right with her, she said. She remembered me buying that place. She remembered how hard I'd worked. I thanked her and made a decision right then. I wouldn't tell her the plan because I trusted her heart but not her ability to keep a secret in a family that runs on gossip. But I asked if she'd be at the dinner. She said yes. Because what I was about to do needed a witness. And not the kind my father had invited to applaud him. The closing happened at 9 a.m. on the 30th. In a small office that smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. Took 40 minutes. That's the part nobody tells you. The thing that takes 10 years to build can change hands in 40 minutes with a pen, a notary, and a stack of paper. I signed where the little flags pointed. Marcus signed across from me, calm and pleased. A man who'd wanted this unit for 8 months and finally got it. The title officer slid the final documents into a folder, and told me the funds would hit my account by end of day. And then it was done. I drove back one last time, let myself in with a key that wasn't mine anymore, and stood in the empty living room I'd painted with my own hands. Morning light came through the balcony doors the way it always had, completely indifferent to who owned the walls. I let myself feel the loss, because pretending it wasn't real would have been its own kind of lie. I'd given up my home, not to my family, to a stranger by choice on my own terms. There's a world of difference between losing something and letting it go. My grandfather's folder was already packed in my car. I took one slow walk through the rooms, said goodbye to the balcony, and locked the door behind me for the final time. Marcus would change the locks within the week. By the time Cole's rental truck pulled up on the morning of January 1st, a stranger's name would be on the buzzer, and a stranger's key would be in the lock. But first there was a dinner. There was a toast to ruin. That afternoon, while the sale funds landed in my account, Cole texted one more time. Truck booked for 9 a.m. January 1st. You there? Bring the key. He didn't ask. He informed. I read it standing in my half-packed apartment, boxes everywhere. The Atlanta job already accepted in an email I'd sent that morning. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say to a man planning to move into a house that had sold the day before. I could have let it end there. Skipped the dinner. Let them drive to a stranger's locked door on the 1st and let the truth arrive without me. Cleaner maybe. But I'm not built for clean disappearances. Not entirely. My family made their decision in a crowded room on purpose, so the crowd would pressure me into a yes. I decided the truth deserved the exact same audience. Not for revenge, though I won't insult you by pretending there was none in it. Mostly because I was done being the quiet one who absorbed everything in private while they performed their version of events in public. I wanted to stand in the same light my father chose for his toast and say one true thing out loud where everyone could hear it. Then I wanted to leave and keep leaving all the way to Atlanta. I picked out what I'd wear the way you pick armor, and drove to my parents' house one final time. New Year's Eve was even more crowded than Christmas. My father had invited half the family and a few neighbors, just like Carol warned. Streamers on the mantel, the good champagne my parents saved for weddings. My sister and Cole sat near the head of the table like guests of honor, kids wired on soda and the promise of new bedrooms. I came in quietly, kissed my mother's cheek, set a covered dish on the counter like always. A slim folder sat tucked in my bag. I said almost nothing through dinner. I watched my father glow. I watched Cole lean back like a man who already had the keys in his pocket. I caught Carol's eye once across the table, and she gave me a small, worried nod. When the plates were cleared, my father stood and tapped his glass, and the room went obediently silent, because this was the moment he'd been advertising for a week. He talked about family, about hard times and sticking together. He held up a single brass key on a ribbon, a prop he'd clearly bought just for the occasion, and announced that as of the new year my sister's family would have a real home. His gift to his grandchildren. He looked right at me when he said gift, daring me to flinch. Then he repeated the line he thought was a closed door. It's settled. The kids have a home now. The room erupted in applause. Champagne started pouring. My sister cried the easy, pretty kind of tears. Cole reached out and took the brass key from my father's hand like it meant something. Every head turned to me, waiting for the gracious aunt to smile and bless it, just like at Christmas. My mother watched me with hopeful, shining eyes. I set down my napkin. I stood up. And for the first time in my life, I didn't give them what they expected. I stood and I didn't raise my voice. That was the entire strategy, the only one that ever works against people who expect you to break. I waited until the applause died on its own, until the curiosity in the room got heavier than the celebration. Then I spoke in the same calm, even tone I used to deliver bad news to clients. Before anyone gets too comfortable, there's something you all need to know. I opened the folder and laid 2 pieces of paper on the table, right next to the champagne. The first was a copy of my deed, my name highlighted, and only my name. The second was the closing statement, dated December 30th, signed and stamped. I slid them toward my father so he could see clearly. You can't give away something that was never yours, I said. The condo was mine. Nobody else's. And it's not mine anymore either. I sold it 2 days ago. The room didn't understand at first. There was a beat of confused silence, the kind where people glance at each other to check they heard right. My father picked up the closing statement. I watched his eyes move down the page, to the date, to the signatures, to the one word that finished the sentence. Sold. His face changed slowly, like ice going gray before it cracks. My sister stopped crying. Cole set the brass key down on the table with a small click that was somehow the loudest sound in the room. My mother put her hand over her mouth. And I just stood there, calm as a winter morning, letting the paper do what years of my explaining never could. The quiet held for one long second, then it broke completely. Cole went first, exactly the way I knew he would. He shot up so fast his chair tipped over behind him, slammed his hand flat on the table, champagne glasses jumping. He shouted that I'd ruined his family, that I'd stabbed my own nieces and nephews in the back, that the truck was booked, that the kids had already picked their rooms. Who did I think I was? My sister was right behind him, crying for real now, the ugly kind, demanding how I could be so cruel, so selfish, so cold. The room I'd stayed so calm and turned into pure noise and pointing fingers, and at the center of it, I just stood with my hands folded, which made them angrier, because there was nothing left to push against. My father found his voice and roared that I had no right, that this was a family matter. And that's when I handed the line back to them. The exact one my mother had said through the kitchen wall on Christmas Eve, the one that started all of it. I waited for a gap in the shouting and said it quietly, so they had to go silent to hear it. You kept telling everyone I didn't need all that space. That it was just me. I let that land. Then, well, now none of us have it. The whole room went dead silent. My sister's mouth opened and nothing came out. Cole's purple face just hung there. My father sat down hard like his legs had quit. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't insulted a single person. I'd simply handed them back their own words with the math attached. And the math was final. Across the table, Aunt Carol had both hands pressed to her chest, tears in her eyes, nodding, the way you nod when somebody finally says the true thing out loud. It was my mother who got to me the way only mothers can. In the middle of all that chaos, she didn't yell. She just looked at me, hand still over her mouth, eyes wet and confused, and said in a small voice, "But honey, I only thought, you always seemed so fine." And there it was. The entire tragedy in one sentence, with no villain in it at all. Just a lifetime of quiet assumption. She'd decided I was fine so long ago and so completely, that it stopped being something she checked and became the foundation everything else was built on. Checks. The rescues. The giving away of my home because Reagan is fine. Reagan doesn't need help. Reagan doesn't need that space. Reagan will understand. My throat went tight, but I didn't let it pull me off course, because softness right then would have undone everything. I looked at her and said gently, "That was the problem, Mom. You decided I was fine. So my whole life became something you could spend." I told her I loved her, and I meant it, and that's exactly what made it land. I told her I was done being the family's emergency fund. Not in anger. In the flat, certain voice of someone reading a final balance. She started crying, and part of me wanted to cross the room and hold her, the way I'd held this family together for a decade. I didn't. Some boundaries only count if you let the other person feel the full weight of them. I let her feel it. I picked up my deed and my closing statement and slid them back into the folder, because they were mine to keep, like everything else I'd earned. Then I said the last thing I came to say, to the whole table. The cousins, the neighbors, everyone my father had invited to watch him be generous with my house. I told them the money from the sale was mine. I told them my life was mine. I told them I'd taken a job in another city and would be gone within the week. I said I'd always be their family, but I would never again be their bank account. Then I reached into my coat pocket and took out the spare key to my parents' house, the one I'd carried for years so I could check on them any time, be the reliable one at any hour, and set it on the table next to Cole's useless brass prop. I think you can all manage from here, I said. I thanked my mother for dinner because she had still cooked it, and manners outlive everything. And I walked out. Nobody followed me at first. The room was too stunned to move. At the door I heard Carol's voice behind me, clear and steady, saying to the whole table, "She's right, you know. I remember her buying that place. None of you helped her." That was the witness I'd come for. I stepped out into the cold night air, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, my chest felt wide open instead of clenched. I left for Atlanta the morning of January 1st. Car packed to the roof, sunrise in my mirrors. Around the second hour my phone lit up and didn't stop. By the time I pulled over for gas at noon, the screen said 79 missed calls. I scrolled through them once, just once, before turning the ringer off for good. Cole called 11 times, voicemails sliding from threats to bargaining and back to threats. My sister called and texted long, weepy paragraphs about how I'd broken her children's hearts, never once mentioning she'd planned to take my home without asking. My father called 4 times and left 0 messages, because my father doesn't apologize. He waits for the world to come crawling back to him. This time it wasn't going to. My mother called the most. Hers were the only voicemails I listened to twice. In the last one she wasn't angry. She just said, "Please call me back, honey. Please." I sat in that gas station parking lot and let myself feel exactly how much I loved her, and how I still wasn't going to call. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. The only message I answered was from Aunt Carol. "You did the right thing and I'm proud of you, and don't you dare let them tell you otherwise." I wrote back, "Thank you." Then I turned off the ringer and drove. Here's the fallout in the plain accounting of it. My sister's family didn't get a condo, because there was no condo left to get. Cole returned the rental truck and paid the cancellation fee with money he didn't have. My parents had to explain to every cousin, neighbor, and churchgoer they'd bragged to that the generous gift had evaporated, because it was never theirs to give in the first place. And for the first time in years, when something in that family broke, the phone that rang wasn't mine. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that too. Felt quiet. I felt like someone who'd finally stopped bailing water out of a boat she didn't own, and simply stepped onto dry land, surprised to find it solid. Here's the only lesson I took from all of it, and I'll give it to you the way my grandfather gave things to me. Plain and once. Loving your family does not mean letting them spend your life like loose change from the family jar. You're allowed to own something nobody else gets a vote on, starting with yourself. That's where I'll leave it tonight. The dish towel in the kitchen. The toast with my house in it. The brass key. And 79 calls I never returned. If you've ever been the reliable one, the one everybody counts on and nobody actually checks in on, let this be your sign to check whose name is really on your life. And here's the last attention anchor before you go. The mistake that put my family in that room wasn't greed. It was assuming somebody who never complains has nothing to complain about. And if that sounds familiar, tell me in the comments where you finally drew your own line. Subscribe, stay with us, and I'll see you in the next one.